Hey, great to have you here. So today we're here with another horror review video, and this one we're going to be breaking down The Watchers. So this is a movie I had not seen before. I know it came out earlier this year. Just recently gave it a watch for the first time, and I'm a little bit disappointed by it overall. I wasn't sure exactly what to expect going into it. I didn't really expect it to be phenomenal, but I thought, I'll give it a chance. I'll give it a fair shake and find something maybe good that comes out of this film. So it's a film that is directed by Ishana Night Shyamalan, who is the daughter of M. Night Shyamalan. And this is her directorial debut when it comes to the big screen, I believe. And I believe M. Night's actually producing it too. So honestly, watching this movie very much felt like a typical M. Night Shyamalan film as far as the plot and the progression of the story and just the ambiance around the entire film. I'm hoping maybe she takes a different direction with her next film, but this definitely had a lot of M. Night Shyamalan. Like, if I didn't tell you who directed this one, you probably would say somebody like him, just because of all that takes place here as far as, hey, let's try to do this twist and this kind of story that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but we're going to make it make sense. A lot of those things that you see a lot of his recent films have, it felt like this film had a lot of those similarities. I wasn't a big fan of it, as I said, so gonna go through the plot, list some pros and cons about it, and probably, if I'm being honest, more cons just because of how I thought the film went overall. Yeah, we'll go from there and give it a score at the end. The movie starts off with a guy who's wandering in the wilderness. He's running away from something, you can tell. Eventually he tries to climb a tree, I think, and he falls down, winds up getting grabbed and screaming. You don't really see what's interacting with him. He just gets dragged off behind some little hill there. And then we cut to Dakota Fanning, who's pretty much our star here in the film. She's working in this store. It's kind of like a pet store, it seems like, and there's a lot of birds. She's being directed, hey, take this bird to this customer. So she takes it home. She goes to the bar and stuff after that as well, and just get a little backstory on her. And she's driving out to deliver this bird, and she at one point says something like, hey, bird, don't die, or something like that. Recites that line to her a bunch. It's kind of like a parrot type of bird where it's just mimicking the words that she said. And she's like, I didn't think you could do that. So it's kind of funny. It mentions it throughout the entire film because the bird somehow stays with her for the entirety of the film. But she goes and is driving out in the forest, and eventually the car just winds up dying. And she gets out of the car and just leaves it and starts running in the forest and screaming for help. I don't know why you wouldn't necessarily backtrack where you came from, or what are you expecting to hear in the woods? Are you expecting there's a person out there that's going to help you? Not really sure. But eventually she does run into a group of strangers out there, and they're like, hey, don't make a bunch of noise, just come in here and join us. She runs in there, and it's this bunker setup where there's these three people, Madeline, I think Kira and Daniel are the three others. So it's them three and Mina in there. They tell her, yeah, just stare at this mirror. It's totally fine. We're being watched. It's good. This is what you're supposed to do. And they have a DVD of some old reality TV show. So not a whole lot going on in this bunker beyond just looking at this mirror. And then she gets backstory of, oh, they're the Watchers. They watch us, and we have to just do this and they'll leave us alone. We can't leave the forest because if we go out at night, they're gonna kill us, and we can only get so far in the forest before it gets dark. So there's a perimeter as far as how far they can go as far as a radius goes. And yeah, so she just totally buys into this situation. She's like, yeah, this makes sense, and joins the group. Obviously she may be forced to because there's not a whole lot of options, but she doesn't seem to question a whole lot. She does try to challenge the status quo. In some ways, I feel like if she was gonna challenge it, I would challenge it by going far in the forest on my own. There's rules they have that Madeline explains, the older woman who's been there the longest. And there's another two people that have been there. She says 5 months or something like that. One of the things is they can't go down in this well. Mina, Dakota Fanning's character, she's like, yeah, let me just go down in the well. So she chooses to go down in there with Daniel's kind of helping her do it. She's down in there and she finds a bike and some other stuff. And there's a creature down there, but it doesn't seem to really mess with her. And eventually she gets out. So I don't know why he didn't attack her, unless she was maybe she was in the light, so she was safe there, but she gets out of the well somehow. Then later on in the evening, you have this person at the door who we believe to be is the guy from the very beginning. His name is John, I think. He was with Kira, who is Georgina Campbell, so relatively famous actor there as well from stuff like Barbarian. And he's talking to her and hey, let me in. And she's gonna want to open the door to let him in because it sounds like they were together. And Madeline's like, no, we don't open the door at night. It's a Watcher. They're messing with you. So it's kind of one of those movies where these things are mimicking humans, and you have to not fall for their traps, essentially. It's kind of like if you played Until Dawn, maybe think of that with the Wendigos, where they're speaking to you and you have to not trust them. Eventually at one point, Madeline gets over to the table. I don't know why. I'm really surprised they wouldn't have Kira open the door. She's standing there on her own when she was adamant that she wanted to open it. She chooses not to. Then eventually she just announces like, hey guys, I'm going to open the door. And gives her enough time for Madeline to come back and be like, don't do that. They ask a question that only John would know. He fails to answer it. And we ultimately know, like, yeah, this is BS. I think the question that gets asked is, what book was she reading? He's not able to answer it. She says like, hey, pick up the camera and point at yourself. We see it's his face. He winds up getting like grabbed or whatever happens to him. He gets dragged away. Madeline's like, hey, you guys messed with them. So she throws the bike that they found in the well back down the well, even though that was going to be their escape right out of there. We have Madeline say, hey, we don't want to break any rules. We'll find another way out of here. So she throws the bike down the well. It's like, well, if you're going to find a way out of here, you're going to be breaking rules, like, right? Like, isn't the rules you have to sit there and like entertain them? I don't understand that line at all. We also, when they had the Watcher at the door and she's asking, what book am I reading? I don't get how the Watcher wouldn't know, because he's looking at her in the like bunker. He can see what book she's been reading. Unless he didn't like remember in that specific instance, they would know what book was being read by Kira at that point. So I don't know, that felt like a little bit of a plot hole as far as having to know something that only John would know. You have later on, Daniel winds up like running away and he's like messing. They're starting to like lose their cool overall. Daniel winds up running to the bunker and he locks out Mina and Madeline. So Kira and Daniel are in the bunker. Mina and Madeline are like hiding in this little like hidden area that's like under some brush, and they see the Watchers out there, which at one point we were told, hey, if you see a Watcher, you die. And I don't know if that was supposed to be just like a cautionary like warning to people, but they're seeing the Watchers. It's like the first time we really see them, they're just these tall creature like people. They're looking at the glass and Daniel's like, they're not in here, which tells the Watchers that, hey, they're out somewhere amongst you. So they're running around looking. Eventually, Mina and Madeline run back to the bunker. I don't know how this works, but you have Mina tell her sob story about her background is when she was a kid, her and her sister Lucy were driving with their mom. Their mom was like super annoyed with Mina. She was like being such a brat. She wants up putting her fingers out the window, and the mom rolls the window up. The fingers are stuck in there. She's like yelling. The mom has to like turn around. They get in a car crash and the mom dies. So that's kind of like the trauma that Mina's experienced. She's like telling this to Daniel to try to get him to sympathize, being like, no, you don't want to be responsible for somebody else's death. You won't be able to deal with it. He opens it, lets them in. I also don't get, kind of side tangent, the mom died in this wreck, but we have Mina who doesn't take any kind of like harm at all. She doesn't have any scrapes on her face. She's perfectly healthy, and the mom dies. It feels like you would have some kind of like scars or kind of just blood. Something would be happening with your face or your body. Some kind of damage would have happened to you, but she's fine. That's just kind of a nitpick. We then have the Watchers come back to where the four people are now at, because they're trying to present themselves in front of the mirror. Madeline's kind of giving some backstory about her history, and she's like really into folklore, so she's familiar with these creatures or just the entire like forest and just being out there as a whole. And they're struggling to keep them from coming in. They're like, hey, they're gonna break in. Eventually they like move the rug, and we see a hatch underneath the rug. So there's a hatch that's been underneath this bunker the entire time that nobody's noticed until now. Later we kind of find out somebody did know about it, but this rug has been there for months and nobody decided, hey, let's try to move it or do some kind of redecorating with the house. They go down the hatch and it's like this really decked out with ton of food, ton of computers and just experiments that were going on. There's a lot of footage of this professor that Danny mentioned before. He like idolized this guy. We're seeing this footage and we're realizing, hey, he wasn't actually that good of a guy. He built this bunker with some people. Somehow he was able to do that without getting killed by the Watchers. And then when the Watchers would come at night, he would just have the workers get killed, I think is what happened. So he was kind of sacrificing people, which was messed up. He was trying to study the Watchers. His goal, he was really into the whole folklore thing. He winds up capturing one. He tries to interact with it. And then we get a scene where he's like, I gotta stop this. I'm gonna shoot that guy, then I'm gonna shoot myself. And if you're watching this, destroy all my papers. Here's my boat. You can take this. It's over at this location. He goes upstairs and we hear 2 gunshots and we assume he killed the thing and shot himself. Right away when that happens, I'm like, well, wouldn't there have been bodies there where like the creature would be and he would have been? But they don't explain that. Obviously we get kind of a reason why there wasn't later on. They weren't there, so I don't know why anybody would have asked about that question though. Eventually they decide to leave the bunker. I don't know how they would have known when light was happening. I guess they maybe just guessed around when it would be. They get out and they're like, let's go to the boat. So they beeline it to the boat. They see some other folklore stuff and Madeline explains it. I guess she has the background. She's like, oh, I know that story. They wind up getting to the shore and they're like, we made it, yeah. And then you have Daniel make the dumbest move probably of anybody in the movie. he hears John calling from the forest, and he's like, help me! And the other three girls are kind of running to the boat already, and he's just there. He's like, oh, I gotta go help him. They don't realize he went back. They eventually, when they get to the boat, they're like, where is he at? And they look over, he's like dragging the guy, and they're like, dude, how do you not know he's fake? Like, the fact that they knew and Daniel just was like oblivious, I don't know. I don't know what that character development was supposed to be, because he was just like, that has got to be the worst move. Probably one of the worst moves in all of movies. You've had these creatures mimicking humans. Even when they were getting like bombarded in the bunker when they went down the hatch, he heard his own voice being mimicked by these creatures. So you know for a fact this is fake. He goes and grabs the guy, and sure enough, it's one of the Watchers, and he winds up killing Daniel. They're like, hey, we'll wait and see. Maybe it'll be okay, when they're like in the boat. And I don't know what they were waiting for, because sure enough, 2 seconds later, he gets like his neck snapped. They take off on the boat, and you see like a bunch of people come out. They're like the Watchers, and there's like a bunch of naked people. And they just like yell or whatever. Eventually, we fast forward. I will point out too, the bird is like the most insane thing in this. I mentioned this at the beginning, but when they're looking for the boat, they like let the bird go, and they're like, guide us, bird, which I don't know what the heck that even means. But they do that, and then they wind up waking up when they're on the boat, and the bird's there with Mina. And I'm like, okay, this bird is just amazing. She's like holding on the cage the whole time after she lets the bird go too. But once again, we're just kind of nitpicking. They wind up seeing a bridge. They go up there. They see a bus coming along. They get on the bus, and they're like, let's go back to civilization. They go back, and Mina is going to do what she promised she would do, and says, I'm going to go destroy this man's work. I don't really know why she cares to do that, but I guess maybe to prevent other people from making the same mistake. She goes to do that. She gets in by saying she's like the niece of the professor. She's like, oh, Uncle Rory, yeah. She just gets let in this room with all of his stuff unsupervised. And the person lets him in. He's like, yeah, just look around, whatever. So I don't know how that would have happened, but she goes in there, grabs as much junk of his as she can to like destroy, I guess. And she's like listening more. We get more backstory about these things being like fairies, and there's half fairies as well. It's kind of unrealistic that we get this full detail of a character that we wind up uncovering shortly after, but we learned about there's humans and there's fairies, and they argued, and then there was also halflings that were half fairy and half human, and there was an issue and there was conflict, and they're just isolated this forest now at this point, and they can't go in the light. That's kind of the point. I don't know why that's the case, but they're stuck there at this point. When she's digging a little further, we see she grabs some photos of the professor with this woman, and it looks like Madeline. So Madeline and the professor knew each other here. She winds up digging a little bit more in obituaries and find out this woman died. So we kind of learn at this point the Madeline that we've known throughout the entirety of the movie is one of these creatures, and they were just taking the form of Madeline to get off the island, essentially. We also find out it's the one that the guy was working on. I don't know, the part that didn't make sense to me is when he went up to, in theory, shoot her and then himself, there was 2 gunshots. So we're supposed to assume it was to the creature and then to himself. If he didn't kill the creature, why would there still have been 2 gunshots? If he shot and missed or shot and didn't finish it off, he would be shooting more than that many times. Unless we want to say he shot and missed and then the creature grabbed the gun and shot him, like, I don't know what would have happened. Or he shot the creature, then shot himself, but the creature didn't die. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense why there was only 2 gunshots if the creature was still around. But we'll accept it. We have Mina go to Kira's house to try to tell her about this because they want to stop Madeline at this point. Another nitpick is Kira just had like a ballin' house, like pretty nice setup for somebody who was just in the wilderness for at least half a year and just come back. Like if you had a house, you probably would have had it sold to somebody else because you would have assumed forfeited at that point. She goes there. Kind of cool situation here. I will give him credit here. When Mina's telling Kira about this, we have Kira coming home. So we're like, whoa, wait a minute. And we find out that the creature is the Kira that Mina was talking to. And then Kira comes in, knocks out the real Kira. And then she's like chasing Mina around and they're like talking a little bit. And there's like a lot of shape-shifting that the creature's doing. We get to a point where she takes over Dakota Fanning's appearance. So there's 2 Dakota Fannings in the room. And she's going to kill the real Dakota Fanning. And then Dakota Fanning's like, no, you don't understand. You're a halfling. You're half human. That's why you act kind of human-like. So we get the realization this creature was one of the halflings. So that's why they can survive in the light. They're called like a daywalker. They're seen as a freak among their own group with the Watchers. So they didn't really fit into either group of being a Watcher or human. So at this point, there's like mercy shown. The Madeline is like, you know what? You're right. I'm going to live in peace and let you go. So she like goes up on top of this roof. It's like the worst CGI I've ever seen. This looks like 20 years ago CGI, and turns into like this gargoyle, airy type creature and flies away. And we get a little bit of just an ending where we have Mina just talking to her sister Lucy, which is also played by Dakota Fanning. And she's like, yeah, sometimes I see Madeline in forms throughout my time, and we see her outside as a little girl with red hair just staring. She looks back at the camera, and the movie ends. So pretty much the halfling lets them go and spares them, and they live happily ever after, I guess. And she makes up with her sisters, so they're cool at that point too. I don't really know, when she was in the forest, she saw like these little girls running around. At one point I was like, are those other daywalkers? Because that's how they can be there. Is she imagining this and it's just like her and her sister? I'm not entirely sure with that one, but overall, that's kind of the gist of the film. And I know I mostly listed cons when going through that. So those were kind of my thoughts. As far as a pro, I can't give a whole lot. Like, I think the concept was interesting, which the challenge here is a lot of times when it comes to like M. Night Shyamalan movies specifically, the ideas are always really unique and it's just the execution that's all. Problem with this one, with Ishana Shyamalan's movie here, is this was based off of a book. So it technically wasn't even her idea or concept that the movie got made from. The execution was pretty much the directing aspect of it. So a little disappointed with how they executed on it. And you're obviously somewhat stuck to the story you chose to replicate into a movie, but it just didn't really work for me. A pro I would list is they had a really good forest ambiance. As far as the fantasy aspect of things, this movie isn't as much of a horror as you would expect. It is more fantasy-like, with like the fairies, obviously, and being set in the forest ambiance the entirety of the movie for the most part. So it does that well. It just was kind of pitched as a little bit of a different type of movie, and it just, the story was a little bit slow paced and didn't really have a whole lot of payoff that made it worthwhile. It had a really unique, interesting concept, like these creatures are outside, we have to be in here and be on display for them, but it just kind of just flutters out at the end, in my opinion. It's a cool concept where the creature was one of the people the whole time. It felt like that had to have been the case, otherwise they're just making dumb mistakes with the whole hatch and just happens to know all of the lore of these creatures, even though they can't talk. I can appreciate the concept of the idea of the film. I just feel like there was so many loopholes that it took. You can sometimes forgive those if you really enjoy the story. It's not a story I really enjoyed, so those criticisms really stuck out as far as, hey, this doesn't make any sense. Why would nobody have seen this hatch? Why would this lady know all the rules? Why would the professor have been able to build this bunker very easily with this whole setup and all that? It's just, there's a lot of small things that you're like, oh, those are kind of not great, but a lot of times you'll get over those. This is a movie where I didn't really get over them. They kind of really stuck out. If I'm being honest, it was relatively bored throughout the film. I debated pausing it and continuing it at another time. I'm like, no, I'm going to finish the whole movie in one go. So that's normally not a good sign as far as your enjoyment of the film. And I want to try to be positive with it, but if I'm being honest, that's overall how I felt about the film. When it comes to a score for this one, I was a little torn on it because I don't want to say it didn't try something at least. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. I had kind of been debating giving it a 2, but I feel like that may be a little harsh. I don't want to be as pessimistic with my scoring, so while trying to be realistic and authentic with my score, I will go with 3 out of 10 for this one because it is definitely below average in my opinion. Not one I plan to rewatch, and just did not execute on a lot of promises it made, and just didn't have a whole lot of explanations that made a whole lot of sense. And that's sometimes disappointing in a film as far as what you're expecting when you're going into it and what you wind up getting. So those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts on The Watchers? Is it a film that you really enjoyed? Have you read the book? I've heard like mixed feedback on the book as well, so not sure if any of you have any input either on the book or the movie. Would love to see that down below. Either way, appreciate you so much for watching and hope to talk to you again soon.